crack-a-lack and literary geeks, happy Tuesday. Today's video is all about keeping your manuscript flexible. I was gonna do that joke where like I pull my leg all the way up, but then I realized that I'm actually not that flexible to pull my leg that high. Whether you're a pantser or a plotter, everybody goes into a story with a vague idea of what they want, right? You have this character gonna go through this trauma. You have the lovebirds gonna get together at the end. The hero is going to eventually fight and beat the Dark One. Some people have looser or stricter guidelines of where they want to go in their books. Some people color coordinate all their cue cards and write extreme detailed skeletons, and some people are kind of like, here's a vague arc. We'll see what happens. But even the best laid plans can be waylaid when characters decide not to do what you want them to. I know already I've lost a bunch of you because you're probably like, Rachel, they're not real, they're your characters, you can make them do whatever you want. Which, like, true, but I'm sure other creatives understand what I'm saying. If you are a writer, you tend to be a creative, which means that you get your ideas from everywhere and everything. And because storytelling is a creative medium, sometimes when you're telling the story, you get ideas that you think could make the story better. Sometimes these fun facts and details can really add to your story and kind of fill in some background detail, or sometimes they can just pull it way off track and make it really messy. But sometimes when you get into the flow of writing, the most natural thing to write isn't exactly what you planned for. I learned this the hard way when I was writing my first novel, and I remember being in my mid to late teens and being like, all right, I'm gonna write a scene, the characters need to get from A to B emotionally, they have to have this conversation in this scene. And it took me like 2 hours because I couldn't get them to say what I wanted them to say. They just kept veering off course, and the most natural thing to write was not what I needed them to do in that moment. I also remember very clearly after writing that, going downstairs and seeing my dad in the kitchen and he being like, oh, how'd writing go? And I was like, it was so annoying. My characters wouldn't do what I wanted them to. And then he and my mom laughed at me, which, you know, if I was anybody else saying that, I understand, because that sounds crazy. In that case, I allowed myself to be a little flexible because I got to write, I guess, a longer scene because I tried to incorporate what I wanted to write versus what I needed to write into one thing. But my experience notwithstanding, it is up to you to decide how flexible you want to be in your manuscript, because both sides come with pros and cons. So if you're writing your novel and you end up going a little bit off track in a scene and you decide that, no, I want to stay on track, I'm gonna get rid of anything that doesn't fit my exact qualifications of the skeleton outline that I wrote. If you want to keep more rigid guidelines to your novel, that's fine, because it actually allows you to stay on track better, so you're able to get more done. You at least know where you're going. Plus, you don't have to rewrite anything or replan any subsequent novel. But sometimes, if you are too rigid in your manuscript and you don't allow your character to grow naturally and you try to shoebox them into what you wanted in the first place, sometimes it could come across really stiff. I've definitely read books where halfway through a book, a character is developing fine and they're learning and they're doing something that they wouldn't normally do, and then all of a sudden they regress way back into something. And I'm sitting there as a reader being like, you wouldn't do that. I've just spent 200 pages with you doing this on this trajectory, and now you're back here. And that's a sure sign that the writer wanted them to do something else, but then the way that they wrote them in the first place didn't allow for that change, and they got stuck. So they just reverted them back to the original plot that they were going on, and it didn't work any longer. A really good bad example of this is Game of Thrones, because the writers obviously had an idea of how they wanted the series to end, but then because of some other things that happened over here and the characters changed, by the time that they got to the ending, they realized that these characters weren't in a place that would allow them to do the things that they had planned, and they were so set in having this ending that they filmed it and that everyone hated it because it didn't make sense anymore. In this case, they were too rigid and they wouldn't allow for that change to happen, and their lack of flexibility kind of ruined a story. On the flip side, let's say you write a scene that is a little off track and you're like, wow, I really like this. This is a cool detail. This character said a sassy one-liner. I want to keep it. If you want to keep your story very flexible, that means you're probably going to have to do a lot of replotting and rewriting to be able to keep up with the changes that you're making. And if you make significant changes later in the story, you're going to have to go back to the beginning and change things or write in hints so that it doesn't come out of nowhere. Plus, you're gonna have to replot any subsequent scenes or books later down the line. But if you allow your story to go outside of these strict guidelines every now and then, sometimes that can lead to really cool details and world building and character development that you weren't expecting in the first place. But you have to be careful that it doesn't clutter up your story with scenes that don't go anywhere or with subplots that maybe you aren't ready or experienced to write in. It can be scary or bizarre or annoying to veer off track, but it takes skill and practice to decide whether you want to continue continue down this new path or return to the track that you were already on. But to figure out which one to do, you can also ask yourself some questions like, will it reform the story overall or make it about something different? Think of it like theme or aesthetic. What will this change mean to your characters? Will it make them develop faster or slower? And how much longer is it going to take, and how much more difficult is it going to be to finish the novel if you do or don't implement this change? As an ex-theater kid, a bit of wisdom that I can pass on to you is that nobody is mad with a little bit of improv. If you don't know what to do or your scene's feeling flat, allow yourself to improv a little bit. It's not live, it's not set in stone. You can go back and delete it or rewrite it or whatever you want later, but you can allow yourself to fumble around a little bit until you get back on track. And sometimes that will make the scene feel, you can tell that you don't know where you're going, or sometimes it can be really fun and add like a little amusing anecdote. I say most creatives, whether you're a writer or a painter or a composer, know that sometimes the end result of a project isn't always what you expected it to be when you began it. Depending on how well you know your story and your own writing style, it's up to you to decide how flexible you want to be in your manuscript. Not allowing yourself to be flexible can sometimes make the story feel stiff or formulaic, but allowing yourself to be too flexible means that there tends to be some waffling. That's the best part about writing, right? You can always go back and rewrite it. Please leave down below your own thoughts on your manuscript or any funny times that you decided to just improv a scene and it ended up being really good or really bad. I feel like I get my best dialogue from improv scenes just because I'm just like writing whatever comes to mind, and I like to think that I'm a funny person, but I also definitely need to plan stuff out in advance, because if not, I will, like I said, waffle forever and then no one ever goes anywhere and I'm just like 3 pages later it's just a very large long description of trees. Join us on Sunday at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube for our live chat, and I hope to see you guys all there. It is a very hot week here in Vancouver, so I hope all of you are staying safe and staying cool. Cheers to that. Have a good week.